Travertin. MAGNAT STYLE Travertin is a fine-grain mineral plaster based on lime binder and provided in form of dry powder. Proper application allows the product to imitate natural travertine, including its characteristic pitting and cavities. The final color and effect are obtained by covering the finished texture with MAGNAT STYLE Rustic Top Coat Sealer. The plaster perfectly absorbs the pigmented color throughout its mass and allows you to create your own unique imitations of natural travertine. The product is recommended for residential and public access rooms. It looks perfect on such architectural items as fireplaces or columns. Application of the coating requires the following products and tools. Undercoat. A primer for optimum substrate preparation. Travertin. A fine-grain mineral plaster that imitates natural stone. Coloring pigment. A concentrated pigment for coloring MAGNAT STYLE products. Rustic Top Coat Sealer. A matte acrylic sealer for surface coloring and the protection of the travertine coating. A steel float. Substrate preparation. Before starting work, examine the surface and prepare it properly. The substrate for MAGNAT STYLE Travertin should be solid, smooth, even, dry and free of dust, adhesive residues, oil, grease or grime. Regardless of the substrate type, it's recommended to apply one layer of MAGNAT STYLE undercoat as a primer for the travertine layer. The primer contains fine-grain quartz sand. Its application guarantees the proper adhesion of decorative layers. Apply the paint with a roller or a brush and leave it for about 2 hours to dry. Product preparation. Power stir the dry plaster while adding about 0.4 liter of water per 1 kilo of dry mass. Leave the mixed plaster for about 30 minutes in a closed container and stir again just before application. Proper working consistency of the product should prevent it from sliding from the steel float. Applying the first layer. Apply the properly prepared plaster on the surface with a steel float. Apply the first layer in a smooth coat at the grain thickness and level out possible swellings. Leave the applied compound for about 12 hours to dry. applying the second layer. Stir the plaster again before applying the second layer. Wet the entire surface of the first layer with water to reduce absorption and prevent the new layer from drying too quickly. This will result in a level and smooth surface. When applying the plaster on larger surfaces, wet them in the same way. Build the decorative layer on each single plane without interrupting your work. Apply the second layer of the travertine in a slightly thicker coat, that is, above the grain size. Note that the compound will dry faster when thin, which will force you to proceed with the texture faster. Gently smooth the second layer to properly seal the imitated stone structure. Building the pattern. After a few minutes, proceed to build the characteristic travertine pattern on the smooth coat. Hold the float perpendicular to the surface and scratch the pitting and cavities in the surface. Properly pre-dried layer will allow to create irregular pitting. If the travertine coat is too wet, the pattern will be formed across the entire width of the tool. If the plaster is too dry, it may split away from the substrate in the process of pattern making. Leave the patterned surface to dry a little, then smooth it with a float in the direction of the sculpted pitting. Before the plaster dries completely, remember to smooth the coat gently by passing the Venetian float in various directions in order to properly seal the stone texture in the smoother travertine surface. Leave the finished surface for about 12 hours to dry. Surface sealing. Reduce the texture absorption by coating the whole surface with MAGNAT STYLE Rustic Top Coat Sealer. This will allow later to color the coat uniformly and without stains or streaks. Apply the sealer with a roller or brush. Leave the coated surface for about 4 hours to dry. When working on larger surfaces, apply the second layer of the top coat sealer after the first one has dried. Surface coloring. When coloring the produced texture, mind the surface area, its accessibility, the air temperature range, and relative humidity. Plan your work considering these factors to efficiently and uniformly color the entire surface. Moreover, you will need a container with water, large sponges, and a microfiber cloth ready. Depending on the selected color, add enough coloring pigment to MAGNAT STYLE Rustic Top Coat Sealer and mix the products well. If there is only one person to color a larger surface, the operation can be done with the use of MAGNAT STYLE Impregnating and Protective Wax, colored with the pigment of choice. To produce a color similar to that made with the top coat sealer, add the coloring pigment in the amount of about 10% of the original color formula for one 400-gram container of the wax. Apply the product with the Venetian float in various directions, removing an excess of the wax with the sharp edge of the float after each stroke. After coating about 5 square meters, wash the slightly dried wax with the sponge well wetted with water until a contrasting color is produced. Remove remaining streaks with the wetted microfiber cloth. Continue in the same way on the entire surface. It's important to do the last wash with clean water. If there is only one person to color the travertine on a small surface, it's best to apply the top coat sealer with a roller on a pole. Coat a patch of about 2.5 square meters in this way, then wash it with the well-wetted sponge, passing it along the produced texture. Do the last wash with clean water. The drying time is about 1 hour for the top coat sealer and about 2 hours for the wax. The surface is resistant to washing and wet scrubbing in 3 days. Other methods of decorating with the travertine. MAGNAT STYLE Travertin can be perfectly colored throughout by directly adding MAGNAT STYLE coloring pigments to it. Render your custom travertine coat on the first dry layer of plaster. On smaller and easily accessible areas, the compound can be applied without wetting the substrate with water. Apply the compound by joining the colors wet on wet. Scratch out the travertine texture in the slightly dry and smooth surface. Thoroughly smooth the sculpted texture before it's completely dry. Use strokes in various directions to properly seal the stone texture. Decorate the remaining parts of the surface in the same way. When the whole texture has dried thoroughly, that is after about 12 hours, paint the whole surface with colorless MAGNAT STYLE rustic top coat sealer for additional protection. The drying time of the top coat sealer is about 1 hour. The surface is resistant to washing and wet scrubbing in 3 days.